Now, I've told stories about my fear of the dark and events that have happened to trigger this or have been exploited. But when I think about it, I mean, really think about it, all of it could have quite possibly stemmed from this one series of events when I was only 3 years old. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, we lived in a small town in Ohio. So small, in fact, that they didn't even broadcast the local television station in color until we lived there for about 5 years, but I digress. We lived in a medium-sized two-story home. Of course, it was ginormous to me. Everything was. The way the house was situated was as follows. From the front entrance, you look forward, and there were stairs to the second floor. You climb 2 stairs, make a hard right, and up the remaining 12 or so to the hallway that led to my parents' bedroom and the nursery/laundry room. While still in the foyer, if you turned to the left, you would see our living room. Not one of those do not touch a damn thing in here living room. Just a living room that opened up to the dining room and turned right into the kitchen. If you turned right, you would see a long hallway. You travel down that hallway, and on your first left would be where the kitchen completed the circuit. Travel farther down and you would reach a door. That door was the main bathroom. If you were to turn right again, you would see our family room. If you would turn left and walk through a nasty cold spot, you would be in my room. Now I say my room because my brother was still an infant at the time and he slept upstairs in the nursery down the hall from my parents' room. Now the cold spot I mentioned, I have to make note of this because my mom corrected me, was not always present, which is why I classify it as a cold spot and not a permanent draft. My parents bought the house in 1978 from an older man named Carl. From what my mom told me, he was a kind gentleman who was recently widowed and felt that the house was just too big for him now. He did give my parents a word of advice, though. Make sure you take good care of the flowers, would you? My mom thought it was sweet, but her focus was more on making this new house a home and as quickly as possible. The first task, getting rid of that olive drab paint in the main bathroom. Since she was a stay-at-home mom, she had plenty of time between nap times to tackle this job in a single day. The bathroom wasn't that large, and most of the walls were already covered in yellow tile. Armed with a few tarps, a roller, and a single can of paint, my mother went to work. In the middle of turning the olive drab to a bright peach, she heard a faint moaning coming from somewhere. It must be one of the boys. She set her roller down and went to check on my brother. He was still fast asleep. She hurried back downstairs to check on me, out like a light. Curious. My dad wasn't supposed to be home for another few hours. She called out to him loud enough to get his attention, but not to wake my brother or myself. No answer. She went to the garage, and his company car was not present. Must not be home yet. She returned to her task. A few minutes later, she heard it again. A light moaning, but this time, it was a little louder. Not closer, just louder. Where is that coming from? Years later, when my mother recanted this tale, she described it not as a wailing moan, but more of a disappointed sigh. There was something there that did not approve of something. My mother finished the chore despite several disembodied interruptions. She cleaned up, made lunch for my brother and I, and waited until we were up before serving us. The next day, my mother returned to the bathroom to see the olive drab begin to seep through the pastel peach. Now, it was clear that since the olive drab was a much darker color, it would take more than one coat to conceal the old color choice. So my mother began again to cover the walls with the brighter color. The moaning returned. Where is that coming from? This time, my father was home, and she quickly ran to see if he was all right. My dad was fine, and what was more interesting is that he was in the back corner of the yard with me the entire time. My brother was taking one of his 50 baby naps that day. She continued, and the disappointing moaning persisted. This was now becoming quite creepy. She once again finished the task and cleaned up. The next day, she returned to find the olive drab was once again seeping through. Puzzling, as this brand of paint was supposed to be able to cover over the darkest paint in a maximum of 2 coats. She rolled back her sleeves and gave the bathroom a 3rd coat. The moaning returned. Oh, shut up. She wasn't having any of that today. The next day, and the day after that, the same results. The olive drab would seep through. 5 coats of peach paint were applied to those walls before she finally gave up and put up wallpaper. The moaning ceased. Now, mind you, my mother comes from a long line of women who sort of have sense about things. Her grandmother had it. Pretty sure her great-grandmother had it. So by this time, she had an inkling that there was someone else in her house other than the 4 of us, our 2 Siamese cats, Mac and Tate, and our Dalmatian, Murphy. Yes, like Indiana Jones, I am named after the dog. Several weeks passed without incident. The house was finally to my parents' liking, and life was swell. That is, until my mother heard an innocent little giggle come from downstairs. It wasn't malicious or devious, just a tickled little laugh from a certain 3-year-old in his bedroom on the ground floor. My father was useless in the middle of the night, so a slight nudge to get him to wake up and check on the boy would be futile. So my mom got out of bed, along the hallway, down the stairs, through the lower hallway, and into my room to see me, wide awake and staring at the empty corner of my room, still giggling. Now this sight creeped my mother out immensely. She slowly walked in and approached me. I turned my head to greet my mother. "Hi, Mommy!" "Hey there, buddy. What you doing?" "Listening." "Listening to what?" "She's telling me stories." "Who's telling you stories?" "The lady in white." "Oh, what kind of stories?" "Funny stories, Mommy." "Oh, okay. Well, you were giggling kind of loud, and I don't want you to wake up your brother, so you should go back to sleep, okay?" "Okay, Mommy." I crawled back under my covers and quickly fell back asleep. My mother studied the walls of my room, then hurried down the hallway, up the stair, back into bed as quickly as possible. This happens several more times in random intervals, always in the middle of the night, but no more than once a week, sometimes only once every 2 weeks. My mom tried to talk to my dad, but he's a hardcore skeptic, so he wouldn't even acknowledge the notion that the house may be haunted. But it continued. The thing you need to realize is that it was never my mother waking up to hear me screaming bloody murder. It was always the sound of me laughing. A comforting thought that whatever was talking to me was not frightening in the least, but still, it did have my mother on edge. She would repeat the process whenever it happened. Down the stairs, along the hallway, through the mercurial cold spot and into my room. There I was, wide awake, looking at the corner and laughing. It was more of a mystery than anything. She had to find out what was going on. She tracked down Carl, the previous owner, and asked if he had time to talk. He was as bright and cheery as he had been when he sold the house to my parents and immediately asked how the house was treating them. My mom humored him and said the house was fine, but they have run into a bit of an issue. "Oh, what's that?" "Well, it seems my oldest son keeps waking up in the middle of the night claiming that a woman in white is telling him funny stories." A chuckle came from the other end of the phone line. "Oh, is that so? I wouldn't worry too much about it." "Well, I'm not too worried since whatever is going on is not harming my son." "And I don't think you'll ever have to be concerned with that happening either. It's just Kate." "Who?" "Kate, my late wife." "Really? Did she happen to have a thing for the main bathroom at the end of the hall?
Oh, Lord, yes. She spent hours painting those walls that god-awful green, and she was proud of it, too. You didn't paint over it, did you?
I had to.
But she wasn't too happy about that.
So that's what I heard. I thought my husband was playing a joke on me or something.
No, she was just showing her disappointment, probably. Now, about your son. Kate was real fond of our grandchildren, and was always telling them stories and jokes and whatnot, so I don't think she would ever harm him. But did you do that one thing that I asked you and your husband to do when you bought the house?
What was that?
Make sure you take care of the flowers. More than that hideous paint, she loved gardening. If you didn't see a spade in her hand, then something was seriously wrong. So just do yourself a favor and make sure you tend to the flowers. You'll be just fine.
The conversation ended and my mother sat back with a proud moment of clarity. She now knew what she was dealing with, and that took a large weight off of her shoulders. Several nights later, my mom was woken up again by the sound of the 3-year-old giggles. She followed her routine down the stairs, along the hallway, and into my room. Hey, buddy. I spun around. Hi, Mommy. Is she telling you funny stories again? Yeah, they were really silly this time. Okay, buddy, but it's time for bed now, alright? Okay, Mommy. She tucked me in tight, headed out the door, and suddenly, BAM! She didn't realize it at first, until it hit her like a ton of bricks when she exited my room. There was no cold spot when she entered, but it was twice as chilling when she exited. There was something wrong this time. The hairs on the back of her neck were erect at attention. Every pore on her body puckered for a moment. She was frozen. She soon found her courage and raced for the stairs. She set one foot on the first step and felt a soft hand on her shoulder. She spun around instantly to see nothing. Suddenly, a new mysterious draft shot her dead in the face with an icy briskness that fixed her to the floor. She was terrified for a fraction of a second when it simply came to her. Hello, Kate, she said softly to the empty hallway. The breeze seemed to talk to her as she stood there, barefoot, on the cold tile hallway floor. Yes, Kate, I promise to look after your flowers. And as quickly as the cold spot slapped her in the face, it was gone. The air was warm and flowing once more. She calmly went back upstairs and returned to bed. In the weeks that followed, there were no more incidents of me waking up and giggling. The cold spot at the entrance to my room even vanished completely. And my mother stayed true to her word, tending to the garden that Kate loves so dear. It can even be said that since then, my mother has taken an avid love of gardening and has been a member of the Master Gardeners in the greater Milwaukee area for years. Years passed, and we moved from that house all the way to Milwaukee, where they lived until they retired several years ago. There's always one thing about this story that has always angered me. I do not remember a damn thing about any of this. I don't remember the stories, I don't remember the cold spot, I don't remember a lady in white, and that drives me batshit crazy. I've always wanted to see a ghost. Little did I know, I already did. My grandfather, my mom's dad, still lives in Ohio. We visited him a while back, and off of a whim, we decided to go see the old house. When we slowly drove past, my mother and I were shocked and dismayed. The people who bought the house from us had dug up all of the landscaping, uprooted most of the bushes and shrubs, and even cut down most, if not all, of the trees. We looked at each other in silence, knowing full well what that meant. and neither of us were surprised to see a for sale by owner sign firmly planted in the front yard.